I never imagined I'd walk in on my cousin like that. When I opened the door, there he was, asleep in his room, and to my shock, his tool was out. I couldn't help myself. I did something I never thought I would. What happened next changed everything, and it turned out to be the most exciting, unforgettable night of my life. The summer heat pressed down heavy and suffocating, just as in my typical summer every year. I got to spend it at my mom's sister's house. As I stepped out of the car and threw my bag over my shoulder, my aunt greeted me with her usual warmth, pulling me into a tight hug before leading me inside. The house smelled of fresh laundry and faint coffee, both comforting and familiar. But my mind wasn't on that. It was on the fact that I'd be spending the next few weeks in close quarters with Ryan, my cousin, my straight cousin. It wasn't the first time I was staying with him for the summer, but this time something felt different. Maybe it was just me, but the thought of sharing a space with him for weeks made my chest feel tight and my pulse a little too quick. Ryan had always been effortlessly confident, the type of guy who never second-guessed himself, always sure of his place in the world. He had that cocky grin that made people like him instantly, a natural charm that made girls, and if I was being honest, me, gravitate toward him. I had learned a long time ago to bury whatever I felt for him, shoving it deep into a place where I didn't have to deal with it. But now, standing in his house again, I could already feel those emotions stirring beneath the surface. "Jake, man, took you long enough." Ryan's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. He leaned casually against the doorway to the living room, a grin stretching across his face. He was wearing basketball shorts and nothing else, his toned chest glistening slightly from the heat. I tried not to look. "Traffic sucked," I said, keeping my voice even as I dropped my bag near the couch. "Excuses," he teased, stepping forward and pulling me into a rough one-armed hug before shoving me playfully. "You still scrawny, or you finally put on some muscle?" I rolled my eyes. "I work out." Ryan scoffed. "Yeah, sure. Bet you still lose every fight." "Maybe because you cheat," I shot back, and he laughed, a sound that sent a weird flutter through my chest. Aunt Linda walked in, handing Ryan a water bottle. "Be nice to your cousin," she scolded, though there was amusement in her tone. "Jake, your room's the same as always. Ryan, don't keep him up all night with your nonsense." Ryan gave her a lazy salute before turning back to me. "She acts like I'm the troublemaker here." I snorted, grabbing my bag and heading toward the guest room. "Because you are." He only grinned, following behind me, his presence filling the small hallway as he walked. The next few days fell into a familiar rhythm, days spent outside, swimming, playing basketball, hanging out, while nights were filled with lazy conversations and hours of video games. It felt comfortable, easy, the way it always had. I always did, but there were moments, small fleeting moments, that made my stomach twist and my breath hitch. The way Ryan would stretch after a workout, muscles flexing under his tan skin. The way he'd throw an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close when he laughed at something stupid I said. The way our legs would brush when we sat too close on the couch, neither of us moving away. One night, after another long day of doing nothing, we ended up sprawled out in his room, the glow from the TV casting soft shadows on the walls. Ryan had flopped onto his bed, one arm draped over his face. I sat on the floor, leaning back against his dresser, watching the screen even though I wasn't paying attention. "You ever think about it?" Ryan's voice came out of nowhere, breaking the quiet. I frowned, glancing at him. "Think about what?" He didn't move his arm, but I could hear the smirk in his voice. "You know, doing something with a guy." My body tensed, my heart slamming into my ribs so hard I was sure he could hear it. I forced a laugh, trying to sound casual. "Where the hell did that come from?" Ryan finally moved his arm, looking at me with that familiar lazy confidence, like he wasn't asking something that had just flipped my entire world upside down. "Just a question," he said, stretching his arms behind his head, making his abs tighten in a way I really didn't need to notice. "Like, I don't know, it's not something I'd ever do, but I get why some guys are into it. I bet it's different, right?" I swallowed hard, forcing my gaze away. My mouth was dry, my head spinning. He was saying it like it was nothing, like he wasn't sitting there throwing a grenade into my already fragile self-control. "I guess," I muttered, keeping my voice neutral. Ryan let out a low chuckle. "Man, imagine if people found out. They'd lose their—" I forced a smirk, finally looking back at him. "Yeah, they would." He grinned, shifting on the bed. "You ever, thought about it?" I didn't know if he was teasing or genuinely curious, and I couldn't afford to find out, so I just shrugged. "Not really." Ryan hummed, seemingly satisfied with my answer, and turned his attention back to the TV. But my mind was a storm, thoughts colliding at a dizzying speed. He didn't know what he was doing to me, or maybe, just maybe, he did. But either way, the story didn't end there, it was only just beginning. What happened next was something I could never have imagined. The next morning, I woke up groggy, my head still spinning from Ryan's words the night before. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my mind, trying to figure out what he had meant, if it was just some random thought or if there was something more to it. But I told myself not to overthink, he was straight, that was all there was to it. I dragged myself out of bed, pulling on a t-shirt before heading to the kitchen. Aunt Linda had already left for work, and Ryan was nowhere to be seen. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the ceiling fan. I grabbed a bowl of cereal, still half asleep, when I heard footsteps behind me. "Damn, you look dead," Ryan said, walking in shirtless, rubbing his eyes, his hair messier than usual. I nearly choked on my cereal. "You ever heard of a shirt?" He grinned, stretching his arms, lifting them above his head, muscles flexing. "It's too hot, man. I don't know how you sleep with a shirt on." I tried to ignore the way my stomach tightened and focused on my cereal. Not everyone wants to parade around half naked. Ryan shrugged, grabbing an energy drink from the fridge before leaning against the counter, watching me. "So, about last night?" I tensed, spoon hovering over my bowl. "What about it?" He smirked. "Relax, I'm not saying anything crazy. Just, was it weird?" I forced a casual shrug, keeping my expression neutral. "Nah, just random." Ryan took a sip of his drink, his eyes still on me like he was studying my reaction. "You sure? 'Cause you got all quiet after." "I was just tired," I lied, forcing myself to meet his gaze. Ryan nodded slowly, his smirk fading into something unreadable before he pushed off the counter. "All right, if you say so." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding as he walked away, but the moment of relief was short-lived because a second later he turned back around. "Oh, by the way, some of the guys are coming over later. Hope you're ready." I frowned. "For what?" Ryan grinned. "A little fun." I didn't like the way he said that, but I didn't have time to argue before he disappeared into his room. Later that afternoon, his friends showed up. I had met most of them before, Chris, Dylan, Marcus, all part of Ryan's usual crowd. They were all loud, cocky, and exactly the kind of guys Ryan fit in with. We spent the day outside, messing around, playing basketball, jumping in the pool when the heat got unbearable. It was fun, but every now and then I'd catch Ryan watching me in a way that made my skin prickle, like he was testing me, like he was waiting for something. Then, sometime after dark, when the guys were lounging around, drinking, laughing over some story Marcus was telling, Ryan leaned over to me, close enough that I could feel the heat of his breath against my ear. "You ever play Truth or Dare?" I turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, what kind of question is that?" He smirked. "Good, 'cause we're playing." And just like that, the game started. It was the usual stupid dares, chugging drinks, prank calling exes, running around the backyard in just boxers, nothing serious, nothing crazy. But the tension started to build the longer the game went on. Then it was my turn. Chris grinned at me, already looking like he was up to no good. "Truth or Dare, Jake?" I hesitated. Truth felt too risky, Dare felt even worse. Ryan smirked, leaning back lazily on the couch. "Come on, man, don't be a coward." I narrowed my eyes at him, my competitive side kicking in. "Dare." Chris's grin widened. "All right, I dare you to kiss someone in this room." The atmosphere changed. The guys erupted in laughter, nudging each other as if it were the funniest thing they'd ever heard. My heart hammered in my chest. Sound pounding in my ears. "Oh, this just got interesting," Marcus said, taking a sip of his drink. Dylan shook his head, grinning. "Damn, Chris, you really went for it." Chris just laughed. "What? It's a classic dare." I swallowed hard, forcing a smirk even though my mind was racing. "Yeah, well, too bad there's no girls here." "That's the fun part," Ryan said, his voice amused. He was looking at me, head tilted slightly, lips curled in that same teasing smirk he always wore. I could feel my palms sweating. "You're all straight," Marcus shrugged. "Doesn't have to mean anything. It's just a dare." Chris clapped his hands together. "Exactly, just a dumb game." My throat was dry. I was stuck, backing out would just make it worse. Then Ryan did something that made my breath hitch. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and gave me a look I couldn't quite read. "Come on, Jake, you scared?" There was something in the way he said it that made the space between us feel charged, my pulse quickening with every word. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I was already moving. I leaned in, closing the space between us, heart hammering, stomach twisting. And then our lips brushed. It was barely a kiss, just the slightest press of my lips against his, but the second it happened, it was like the world stopped. The guys erupted into shouts and laughter, but I barely heard them because for a split second, Ryan didn't move away. He didn't flinch, didn't shove me, didn't even look shocked. He just stayed there, looking at me, something flickering in his expression that made my stomach flip. Then, just as fast as it happened, Ryan grinned, shaking his head. Damn, Jake, didn't know you'd actually do it. I forced a laugh even though my head was spinning. Well, you dared me. Chris whistled, shaking his head. That was unexpected. Dylan smirked. You looked like you almost enjoyed that, Ryan. Ryan scoffed, rolling his eyes. Shut up, idiot. But the way he looked at me after, just for a split second when no one else was watching, made my chest tighten. The night carried on, but I wasn't really present. My mind was stuck on that moment, on the way Ryan didn't pull away, on the way his gaze had lingered just a little too long. I didn't know what it meant, but something told me this summer was about to get a whole lot more complicated. The game eventually fizzled out, the guys moving on to talking about football and some party happening next weekend. I played along, laughing at their jokes, nodding when I was supposed to, but my mind was still stuck on what had just happened. The kiss. It wasn't even a real kiss, just a brush, just a stupid dare. That's what I kept telling myself. That's what it was supposed to be. But then why couldn't I stop thinking about the way Ryan looked at me right after? Why didn't he pull away immediately? And why did I feel like for just a second he wasn't completely against it? I tried to shake it off. Ryan was straight, always had been, always would be. That kiss meant nothing to him, and I needed to get that through my head. Before I started seeing things that weren't there, I told myself to forget about it, but forgetting was impossible. When Ryan was sitting right next to me, his arm resting behind the couch, fingers so close to my shoulder I could feel the heat from his skin. When he leaned over to take a sip of his drink, his knee brushed against mine, and even though it was probably accidental, my whole body tensed. I needed air. I got up, stretching like I was just tired. I think I'm going to crash, I said. Chris nodded. Yeah, man, we should probably head out too. The guys all groaned about having to leave, but they didn't argue, grabbing their stuff and saying their goodbyes. Ryan walked them to the door, laughing at something Dylan said. I took the chance to escape to my room, shutting the door behind me and exhaling like I had been holding my breath for hours. I sat on the edge of my bed, running a hand through my hair, telling myself to stop being weird. It was just a game, it didn't mean anything. A few minutes later, I heard the front door shut, followed by Ryan's footsteps, then his voice closer than I expected. You good? I looked up just as my bedroom door pushed open. Ryan was standing there, one hand on the door frame, eyes scanning me like he was trying to read my mind. I forced a chuckle. Yeah, why wouldn't I be? He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. I don't know, you bolted out of there fast. Seemed kind of weird. I shrugged. Just tired. Ryan didn't look convinced. He walked over to my bed, sitting on the edge like he had every right to be there, like this wasn't weird at all. You sure it's not about that kiss? I froze. Ryan smirked, elbow resting on his knee. What, you going to pretend it didn't happen? My throat went dry. It was a dare. Yeah, Ryan said, tilting his head, but you did it pretty fast, like no hesitation. I scoffed, trying to act like I wasn't seconds away from combusting because if I didn't, you all would have called me a coward. Ryan raised an eyebrow, but he didn't argue. He just nodded, his gaze still locked onto me like he wasn't done messing with my head. Then he surprised me again. Have you ever kissed a guy before? I stared at him, that was not the question I expected. Ryan smirked like he knew exactly what he was doing to me. What, you don't have to answer if it's too personal. I swallowed hard. Why do you care? He shrugged. Just curious. I didn't know what to say to that. My heart was beating way too fast, my hands clenching at the sheets like they could somehow keep me grounded. Then Ryan leaned back on his elbows, exhaling. It wasn't as weird as I thought it would be. I blinked. What, the kiss? He said casually, like we were talking about the weather. I thought it'd be gross or whatever, but it wasn't. It was just a kiss. My pulse pounded in my ears. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ryan, the cousin I had spent years trying to ignore my feelings for, was sitting on my bed telling me that kissing me wasn't weird. I had to be dreaming. He must have noticed the way I was staring. Because he chuckled, shaking his head. Relax, man, I'm not saying I liked it or anything. That stung more than it should have. I didn't even know why I forced a laugh. Yeah, obviously, Ryan stretched, yawning. Anyway, don't overthink it. It was just a game. I nodded, even though my mind was screaming. Then, as if he hadn't just casually dropped a bomb on me, Ryan stood up, stretching again, his shirt riding up slightly before he turned toward the door. Night, Jake, and with that, he walked out, leaving me sitting there, heart pounding, head spinning, and completely unable to process what just happened. I laid back on my bed, staring at the ceiling. I knew I should let it go, but something about the way Ryan said it, wasn't weird, kept circling in my brain. Like maybe, just maybe, he was trying to convince himself of something too. And for the first time since he moved in, I started to wonder if I wasn't the only one feeling something. And I was right. What happened next left me speechless. The next morning, I woke up feeling like my brain had been running a marathon in my sleep. My dreams had been a mess of memories, flashes of the night before, Ryan's smirk, his words, the way he sat so casually on my bed like none of it was a big deal. But it was a big deal, at least it was to me. I groaned, rubbing my face before forcing myself out of bed. I wasn't about to spend the whole day obsessing over something that probably meant nothing. Ryan was straight, he had said it himself. He didn't like the kiss. He had been teasing me, playing it off, making sure things weren't awkward between us. That was all. But if that was true, why couldn't I shake the way he'd looked at me? Pushing those thoughts away, I threw on some clothes and made my way to the kitchen. The house was quiet, and for a second, I thought maybe Ryan had already gone out. But then I heard it, the sound of the shower running. Of course. I rolled my eyes at myself, trying not to think about Ryan in there, soaking wet, steam rising off his body. Nope, I needed to stop. I grabbed a glass of water and sat at the table, scrolling through my phone, trying to focus on anything else. A few minutes later, the bathroom door creaked open, and I heard Ryan's footsteps padding down the hall. Then there he was, towel slung low on his hips, droplets of water still clinging to his skin, his hair damp and messy like he had just run a hand through it instead of using a towel. I nearly choked on my water. Ryan didn't seem to notice my reaction. He walked into the kitchen like he owned the place, stretching his arms above his head, making his abs flex in a way that felt borderline illegal. "Yo," he said, grabbing a protein shake from the fridge and twisting off the cap. "Sleep okay?" I nodded, setting my glass down before I dropped it. "Yeah, you." Ryan smirked, taking a sip of his drink. "Yeah, no weird dreams or anything." I narrowed my eyes at him, wondering if that was a dig at me, but he just leaned against the counter, acting like everything was completely normal. I hadn't kissed last night like he hadn't practically admitted that it wasn't as weird as he expected. I needed to get out of here. I stood up, grabbing my phone. "I'm going to go for a run." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you run in the morning?" "Since I needed an excuse to stop staring at you," I shrugged. "Just felt like it." Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. "All right, man, knock yourself out." I didn't waste any time heading for the door, desperate to clear my head. But before I could step outside, Ryan called after me. "Hey, Jake." I turned, trying not to let my eyes drop to where his towel was barely holding onto his hips. He smirked. "You sure you're not running away from something?" I forced out a laugh, flipping him off as I walked out. But the truth was, yeah, I was running because if I didn't, I wasn't sure what I'd do the rest of the day. I did my best to avoid Ryan, not in an obvious way. I wasn't completely pathetic, but I kept myself busy, making sure there was always something to do, somewhere to be. By the time the sun started to set, I felt a little better, like I had finally pushed the night before into the back of my mind. That was until Ryan came knocking on my door. "Yo," he said, leaning against the frame. "Want to go out tonight?" I blinked. "Where?" He shrugged. "Chris is having people over. Could be fun." I hesitated. The last thing I needed was another night of drinking and stupid dares, but Ryan was looking at me like he expected me to say yes, and for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to say no. "Yeah," I muttered. "Sure." Ryan grinned. "Cool, let's head out." By the time we got to Chris's place, the party was already in full swing. Music blasted from the speakers, and people were crowded in the kitchen, the living room, even out on the back patio. I grabbed a drink, trying to relax, but it was hard when Ryan was right there, effortlessly charming everyone, making it look so easy. He had always been that way, confident, relaxed, the kind of guy who never seemed to doubt himself. And that was exactly why I had spent years trying not to fall for him. But then something changed. It was sometime after my second drink when I was finally starting to loosen up, when I turned to find Ryan already looking at me, not just looking, watching. I swallowed hard. What? He smirked, shaking his head. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I could feel it in the way his eyes lingered a little too long, in the way he stayed close like he wanted to make sure I didn't go too far. And maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was the fact that I was tired of pretending like I wasn't affected by him, but I decided to test him. I turned to the girl next to me, some brunette I barely knew, and leaned in just a little closer than necessary. She laughed at something I said, touching my arm, her body angled toward mine. And that was when I saw it, Ryan's jaw tensed. He didn't say anything, didn't make a scene, but I saw the way his grip tightened on his drink, the way his smile faded just slightly. He was jealous. That realization sent a jolt through me, and before I could stop myself, I pushed it further. I leaned in even closer, just enough for the girl to giggle and press her hand against my chest. That was all it took. Ryan stepped forward, grabbing my wrist. Not hard, not aggressive, but firm enough to make his point. "Hey," he said, voice low, "can I talk to you for a second?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'm kind of busy." Ryan's grip tightened just slightly. "Now, Jake." Something about the way he said my name made my pulse spike. I glanced at the girl, offering a quick, "Be right back," before letting Ryan pull me away from the crowd. He didn't stop until we were outside, away from everyone. The cool night air settled between us. He dropped my wrist, running a hand through his hair, exhaling like he was trying to keep himself calm. I crossed my arms. "What's your deal?" Ryan looked at me, something sharp in his eyes. "Are you trying to piss me off?" I smirked. "Why, you jealous?" Ryan scoffed, shaking his head, but he didn't deny it. "You're acting like an idiot." I took a step closer. "And you're acting like you care." Ryan clenched his jaw, but he didn't step back. If anything, he squared his shoulders, standing his ground like he was daring me to push him further. So I did. I tilted my head, my voice dropping just slightly. "What's wrong, Ryan? You don't like seeing me with someone else?" He exhaled sharply, his fingers flexing at his sides. For a moment, neither of us moved. The tension between us was palpable, crackling like static. Then Ryan spoke, his voice quieter than before. "Do you really want to know what I don't like?" I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Yeah, tell me." Ryan stepped closer, so close I could feel the warmth of his body, his breath ghosting over my skin. His eyes flicked to my lips, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't just a game anymore. Something was about to happen. What happened next changed us forever. The ride home from the party was silent. Ryan didn't say much, and neither did I. There was something between us now, something dense and charged like the stillness before a storm. I kept stealing glances at him, noticing how his jaw was clenched and his fingers gripped the wheel too tight. He hadn't looked at me since we got in the car, and I couldn't tell if he was angry, confused, or feeling something else entirely. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Ryan cut the engine and just sat there for a second, staring straight ahead. I waited, expecting him to say something, but he just exhaled, ran a hand through his hair, then got out of the car without a word. Fine, if he wanted to act weird, that was his problem. I followed him in, shutting the door behind me as he disappeared down the hall toward his room. I stood there for a second, debating whether I should just go to bed or if I should push him, force him to talk about whatever was eating him up. But before I could decide, I heard his bedroom door click shut. So that was that. I sighed, running a hand down my face before heading to my own room. But sleep didn't come easy. My mind kept replaying the night, every glance, every touch, every second that Ryan stood too close without backing away. The way his eyes had flicked down to my lips, the way he had pulled me away from that girl like he couldn't stand to watch me with her. It didn't make sense. Ryan was straight. He had always been straight, but then why was he acting like this? I tossed and turned for what felt like hours, but eventually exhaustion won. My eyelids grew heavy, and I finally let sleep take over. I don't know how long I was out when I woke up, but it was still dark. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I rolled over, blinking the sleep from my eyes when I noticed my door was slightly open. Had I left it like that? Frowning, I sat up, rubbing the back of my neck. Maybe I had forgotten to close it properly. I glanced at the clock. 3:47 a.m. Shaking my head, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. Maybe I needed some water, or maybe I just needed to get up and shake off whatever weird energy was still clinging to me from earlier. As I stepped out into the hallway, I hesitated. Ryan's door was slightly open too. That was odd. Ryan never slept with his door open. Something about that made my stomach tighten, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe he had just been too tired to shut it all the way. Still, before I even realized what I was doing, my feet carried me toward his room. The soft glow of the moon slipped through the blinds, casting faint shadows over the room. Ryan was on his bed, lying on his back, one arm draped over his face. His breathing was slow and steady, deep. He was out cold. I should have left right then, but my eyes drifted lower, and that was when I saw it. The sheet was barely covering him, twisted around his legs like he had kicked it off in his sleep. His boxers had shifted, leaving him completely exposed. My breath caught in my throat. I should have looked away. I should have turned around and left, but I didn't. I couldn't. Heat crawled up my neck, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I knew I was staring, I knew this was wrong, but my body wouldn't move. Then suddenly, Ryan shifted. A small noise escaped his lips, a low sound almost like a sigh. His hand twitched against his stomach, fingers curling slightly before relaxing again. I swallowed, my throat dry. I had never seen him like this, completely unguarded, vulnerable in a way he never was when he was awake. And for a split second, a dangerous thought crossed my mind. Would he wake up if I? No. I took a shaky step back, my breath unsteady. What the hell was I doing? I needed to leave now. But just as I turned to go, Ryan shifted again, this time rolling onto his side. His lips parted slightly as another soft sound escaped him, and that was when his eyes fluttered open. This time his eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they landed on me. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I didn't know if he fully understood what was happening. If he was still half asleep, still trapped in the haze of his dreams, his brows pulled together slightly, his lips parting as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Then something changed. His gaze flickered downward for the briefest second, realization creeping in, his body going rigid. But instead of panicking, instead of freaking out, he just stared at me, breathing a little too fast, his chest rising and falling in uneven patterns. And that was when I knew he wasn't stopping me, he wasn't pushing me away. His hand twitched against the sheets, his fingers curling, his breath catching just slightly, his lips parted again. And when he spoke, his voice was hoarse and low. "What are you doing?" I couldn't answer. I didn't have the words, but I knew what I wanted, and Ryan wasn't stopping me. The space between us felt suffocating, the tension thick, the weight of everything pulling us closer until hesitation no longer existed. Then, before I could stop myself, before I could second guess, I moved. This time, Ryan didn't pull away. His breath hitched, his muscles tensing, but he didn't stop me. Instead, his body responded tentatively at first, then all at once, like something inside him had been waiting for this without him even knowing it. The tension that had been simmering between us for days, for years, finally snapped, and everything that had been unspoken, denied, buried came rushing to the surface in a dizzying, unstoppable wave. It was heat, it was fire, it was everything I had never let myself think about, everything Ryan had never let himself feel until now. His fingers curled into the sheets, his body shuddering slightly beneath mine, his breathing ragged and uneven, but he still wasn't stopping me. If anything, he was pulling me closer, his movements hesitant yet desperate, like he was fighting himself and losing. I felt his resistance crumble, felt the shift from uncertainty to something deeper, something real. And then, in a moment that I would never forget, he let go. I couldn't believe this was real, but it was so amazing. Then, without warning, I turned him around, and we did the thing. I can't go into details, but it was like we were exploring something the two of us had both wanted for a long time. There was nothing left but the overwhelming desire that had consumed me. Time blurred, the room felt smaller, hotter. The silence filled only by the sound of our breathing, the ragged gasps, the way our bodies tangled together in a mess of confusion and need. Nothing else existed in that moment. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it was over. After everything had happened, we lay there in the dimly lit room, our bodies tangled together, hearts still racing. Ryan lay there, his chest rising and falling, his skin flushed, his eyes wide like he couldn't believe what had just happened. My own body felt like it was on fire, my mind racing, trying to process it, trying to make sense of something that shouldn't have made sense but somehow did. The silence was deafening. I swallowed hard. Throat dry, my hands shaking slightly as I pulled away, forcing myself to sit up, forcing myself to breathe. Ryan was still staring at the ceiling, his expression unreadable, his body tense. I couldn't tell what he was thinking, couldn't tell if he was about to freak out or if he was just as lost as I was. Then finally, he spoke. What the hell just happened? His voice was barely above a whisper, but it was filled with something I couldn't name. I didn't answer, I didn't know how to. Ryan exhaled sharply, running a shaky hand through his hair. He let out a breathless, almost hysterical laugh, like he couldn't believe it. Then his expression hardened. We can't. This. He shook his head, still not looking at me. This didn't happen. My stomach twisted for a giggle, but I forced myself to nod. Yeah. My voice was hollow, but it did. Ryan clenched his jaw, pushing himself up, grabbing his discarded shirt and shoving it over his head. He looked wrecked, like his entire world had just been flipped upside down, like he didn't know who he was anymore. Then Ryan shifted beside me, sitting up, but he didn't look at me. His voice broke through the quiet, soft but firm. I don't know what we're doing, but... He trailed off, his words almost lost in the space between us. I was afraid to ask. But what? Ryan didn't respond right away. Instead, he got up, moving to the window, staring out into the dark. I don't think I can stay here, not like this. His voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either, it was distant, as if he was already retreating into himself. I felt a rush of panic, like something was slipping through my fingers, but I didn't know what. Ryan, please. He turned to face me, his gaze sharp. You need to understand something, he said, his words like a quiet warning. This, whatever this was, doesn't mean what you think it means. I opened my mouth, ready to protest, but he raised a hand to stop me. Let me finish. He walked over to where I was sitting, crouching down in front of me, his eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, it felt like everything was suspended in time. I didn't do this because I was confused, he said. I did it because I needed to know if I could walk away. I needed to prove to myself that I could. My heart sank. What do you mean? Ryan gave a bitter smile, shaking his head. You think this is about us, about what we could be, but I'm not sure that's what's real. He looked down, running his hand through his hair. I'm not who you think I am. I don't even know who I am half the time, and I can't keep pretending this. We don't fit into the boxes you want to put us in. We never did. His words hit like a slap, but I couldn't react. Instead, I just sat there, frozen. So what now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ryan stood up but didn't move toward the door. I don't know, he said quietly. I'm not leaving because I don't care about you, but I'm not staying because it's right either. I need time. I nodded, feeling my heart break in slow motion, but I didn't cry. There was nothing to cry about. Really, there was no clear answer to any of this, no neat resolution. In some strange way, that felt like the hardest part of all. I don't think we'll be the same after this, I said softly. Ryan paused at the door, his hand on the knob, and for a brief second, he looked like he might say something, maybe something comforting, maybe not. But then he just shook his head, eyes full of a sadness I couldn't quite understand. No, he said, his voice barely audible. But maybe that's what I need to figure out. And then, without another word, he was gone. I stayed there in the empty room, the silence wrapping itself around me, trying to piece together something that had already shattered. But I couldn't. Maybe I wasn't supposed to. Maybe the real answer was that there were no answers, not right now anyway. Maybe sometimes things just happen, and all you can do is live with the aftermath, however messy it might be. And that was the last thing I thought before the door clicked shut behind him. No words, no promises, just the quiet. Was it okay? Was what I did right? I really want to know what you think. If you've ever found yourself in a situation like this or if you can understand what I'm feeling, drop a comment below. Your thoughts mean a lot to me right now. I just don't know what to make of it all yet, but I guess that's part of this journey, isn't it?